Good morning. Today we are on the map at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, home of the National Museum of the United States Air Force. This museum is a museum buff's dream, 1.1 million square feet. It makes it one of the largest museums in the world in terms of square footage. You're going to need a lot of space if you carry 360 aircraft under one roof. But I'm not here today to look at 360 different airplanes. I'm here today to look specifically at their presidential gallery. This gallery contains airplanes that have served the United States president, basically the Air Force Ones of the past. So we're going to go in and take a look. Come with me. In fact, 1.1 million square feet under one roof. It's a building complex. It's a complex of 4 buildings, but they are interconnected. This was the first purpose-built presidential aircraft. This was Roosevelt's plane. They called it the Sacred Cow because of how much security it had around it. This is the first plane that today would probably be referred to as Air Force One. So here we'll enter the Sacred Cow. Now you definitely have to duck here. I'd say the doorway is maybe 4.5 feet tall. So we'll start down the aisle of the aircraft. We have a little kitchen off to the right here, prepare presidential meals. The electric refrigerator was added later. Got a couple of little cots over here, get some shut-eye. Now continuing our way back in the airplane, this just looks like a cargo area. Oh yeah, area where they might have kept some luggage. Some presidential supplies. Then we get to an area with a meeting table off to the right here. Kind of reminds me of a setup in a camper, like you could fold the table down and turn it into a cot. Sleeping area up here. Now it looks like we're getting into some office space here. So yes, there's the presidential seal on the desk, so I assume that that is President Roosevelt's chair. And there is a couch here for guests to meet with him. Looks like he has a telephone back there. And it looks like this window has a drawstring for the shades. So they can have some privacy in there to do whatever Roosevelt needed to do in private. And then President Roosevelt also had a small lavatory there behind his chair where you kind of see that cubby going in. That was a restroom. Now I was also told by the volunteer that works here that there is a, you see where the picture of the ship is? There is a defined line around that. That's because that pulls out, that whole wall pulls down, and there's actually a Murphy bed behind there. So that was where the president could get some sleep. So since President Roosevelt traveled in a wheelchair, this plane was specially designed with an elevator so that he could be brought up via this elevator versus carried by Secret Service. And he could get into the airplane that way. It looks like another restroom back in the back and some seating areas. This is a replica of the wheelchair that President Roosevelt would have used when he flew. They would push this wheelchair into this container, which is actually the elevator, which would then carry him up into the airplane. And you see that the elevator entryway has a door on it much like that of a landing gear, so that would cover up that hole in the airplane. So a lot of engineering went into making sure that the president was able to get in and out of the airplane comfortably. Now this is the second purpose-built presidential aircraft. This was Truman's plane, named the Independence after his hometown in Missouri. It's President Truman would have come into the Independence through this door. Again, you got a duck to get in. Normal control area for an airplane. So this was the navigator seat. Lots of old equipment, including a pencil sharpener. Some general seating here, not too glamorous. Probably not where the President of the United States sat. A couple of restrooms on the left and the right. Some more pleasant accommodations over here for long distance traveling. And over here on the right, another seating area with a cot on top. Ooh, look at that kitchen. Got a stove, an oven, pantry over here, refrigerator on the right. Okay, we'll go past the kitchen, and this would be the presidential area of the airplane, actually beyond the rear door of the airplane. So there's the presidential seal, and assumably that would be where President Truman sat. Seems like the president had a pretty nice bathroom, complete with a couch. Lavatory on the right. And swing around here, it's got a little sink on the left. Make sure those hands are clean. This is Eisenhower's airplane. So Eisenhower's door, this was a little bit better head clearance than the earlier planes. Still got to duck a little bit. Navigation. Controls. The airplanes are getting progressively larger. So a couple of meeting areas up here. A nice kitchen here. I actually liked the kitchen better, I think, in Truman's airplane. Cargo area, lavatory, executive level seating with cots that would fold down. So Eisenhower had a prop-driven plane, and it was much, much smaller than Kennedy's airplane. Kennedy got the Boeing 707 converted into Air Force One. And this was true luxury. So as I understand it, Roosevelt got his own plane when he was in office. Truman got a plane when he was in office. Eisenhower got a plane when he was in office. Kennedy got this 707 when he was in office. But then maybe the technology wasn't advancing as rapidly as it had been in the early years of aviation. This was the first jet, and this airplane continued in service through many presidents. Eventually, they got a second one of these. That plane is now out in California at the Reagan Museum. This airplane served Kennedy, Johnson, and into the Nixon administration. They got the second airplane. Once they got that airplane, this one became the backup. And these two planes, this one and the one now at the Reagan Museum, served at least through the first Bush, and then they actually stayed in operation even in through Clinton's administration. This plane wasn't retired until 1998. So coming into this airplane, you know it's going to be narrow. John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, Presidents Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, all came through this door. from the front, looks like a pretty ordinary airplane. Turning around here, we have a lavatory on the left. And things aren't exactly like an ordinary commercial airliner. Definitely some major communication center going on up here. Small kitchen off here to the left. So here we have some general seating. Probably not where the president would have been sitting. But then the aisle turns off to the right here, because this over here is the area that the president would have had. So within this area, this would have been, I'm sure, the president's office. We see an additional restroom back here, couch, executive seating, telephones, speakers up there, a old tube TV here. So this plane wasn't retired until 1998. So some of the things on here aren't necessarily John F. Kennedy era. And then over here to the left, an additional seating area. I suppose the president could have sat there as well. And an executive seating area back there in the couch with plenty of telephones. So there's some executive seating here on the left and the right for the president's staff. Now, most presidents are sworn in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol building. Not so with Lyndon B. Johnson. He was sworn in on this airplane in this spot after the assassination. It would have been after the casket had been loaded, but before the airplane took off for Washington, D.C. You can see here in this picture Jackie Kennedy standing next to him. This is the famous shot where she still had blood on her dress, and kind of has a shell-shocked look on her face. And yeah, this is where President Johnson was sworn in, right here in this spot on this airplane. You never know, you might need to send some faxes or make some copies. So they were all set. So they brought Kennedy's casket through this rear door of the airplane. And they stowed the casket over here on the left. So they removed seats that were here at the time, and they actually cut this wall. And so you see there is a line here, and it comes all around. It's got stainless steel dressing it up now. But they had taken a saw, the way I understand it, and they cut this wall away right here and removed this entire section so that they could pivot the casket through here and slide it in into this area along here. And then Jackie Kennedy is said to have sat back here with him during the flight back to Washington, D.C. The timeline of the assassination day is kind of surprising to me as it relates to this airplane. So John F. Kennedy came out the front door of this airplane at 11:45 in the morning on the day of the assassination with his wife. They get into the motorcade. They drive off. The events of the day take place. And at 2:15 in the afternoon, his casket was carried up into this rear door here. So in a matter of 2.5 hours, all of that history that day took place. When I was in high school back in the mid-90s, I was in Junior Air Force ROTC. And as part of that program, we occasionally got to go on a military aircraft for a fun flight. When I was about a sophomore, we had an opportunity to come up here to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and fly on a C-130. And we were maybe sophomores in high school at the time, and we walk out onto the tarmac, and what greets us but Air Force One sitting there right in front of us. So Air Force One sitting there, probably the most famous airplane in all the world. You have these 15-year-old kids or whatever, and we have our cameras ready to go on this C-130 that day. So kids start pulling out their cameras and taking pictures. And the security detail of Air Force One took umbrage to the cameras coming out of the pockets. And so we have security running over toward us. No pictures, you can't take pictures. Put your cameras away. Did anybody take any pictures? And a few kids, they raised their hands, and the security people talked among themselves for maybe 3 seconds and then went about the business of taking the cameras and opening up the backs of them, ripping the film out, handing the cameras back to the kids. Now, my teacher at the time was a retired Air Force colonel, and I looked over at him, and you could see him cringing. He's, sad that the kids are losing their film, probably the only roll of film that they had there that day, but he knew that there wasn't anything he was going to be able to do about it. So those particular kids didn't get to take pictures that day. Fortunately, I kept my camera put away. I can't remember exactly why. It may be that I just knew that I was on a military base and probably shouldn't just indiscriminately be taking photographs out on the tarmac. This is a serving cart that would be used on Air Force One. And on top here they have on display a menu for dinner, January 20th, 2017, so that would have been during the Trump administration. Bacon cheeseburger. Can't go wrong with a bacon cheeseburger. And then the serving cart has normal things that you might think of being needed in flight. Little Tabasco sauces there. Hershey Kisses, a blanket, and small pillow. This talks a little bit about the men who worked on the airplane, and I was told by the volunteer here that this uniform here on the left, worn by Danny Bowen, that Danny Bowen is actually a volunteer here at the museum. He comes over a couple days a week, gives out information. And so he had worked here on the so-called Kennedy plane, this retired 707. But that really puts a face to the artifact when your tour guide says, "Oh yeah, that was my shirt." I think that's pretty cool. That's a picture of him in the tow tug back in 1981. Yeah, the guy built that out of Legos. It's pretty amazing. I would assume there were no instruction sets for that. The Presidential Service Badge is the badge, the blue and gold on the right. That is given to Air Force personnel who serve the President. And you can see it on the right breast of his uniform there. You see here a picture of Ronald Reagan and Queen Elizabeth outside the airplane. You see the security officer guarding the airplane in the background. I was told that Queen Elizabeth did in fact fly on this airplane. She was given the airplane to utilize while visiting here in the United States. So not only carried many presidents, but other dignitaries as well. There are a number of artifacts here from different administrations while flying on Air Force One. I think it's interesting how much you can see smoking was a culture, part of the culture back then. You can see this was a pack of cigarettes. It looks like it was given to the Carters when he visited in 1979 to South Korea. This is looks like a pack of cigarettes and matches that were used during the Johnson to Reagan administrations. JFK, a cigar box during the Kennedy administration. A match book and lighter from the Johnson administration. So we probably aren't allowed to smoke on Air Force One anymore. But back then that was the thing. By the Clinton and George W. Bush administrations, they still had boxes that looked similar in size to cigarettes, but those are actually M&Ms. And you can see some Hershey Kisses here from the Obama administration. This is a magazine in a Air Force One protective cover that would have been used during George W. Bush's administration. Here's a menu that was used during the Trump administration as well. Both menu examples here were from 2017. This is Ronald Reagan's seatbelt that was used in Air Force One in his seat. Richard Nixon flew the 707 to China for his famous visit there. This was a dinner invitation as well as a paperweight that were from that trip. It says this is an information booklet for Ford's 1975 visit to West Germany aboard the 707. Does not say what kind of information was in the book. A flight information report and a luggage tag from the Eisenhower administration. So this card here, it looks like this would have been given to the president. And it says where we are, what's our speed, when they expect to arrive, how far they're going to fly. And yes, Mr. President, Washington time is 1 hour later than CST, Central Standard Time. Currently there are 2 747s servicing the president as Air Force One, and those planes are due to retire once new planes are built. Boeing is currently building 2 replacements, and the hope of this museum is that once those planes are in service and the old ones are retired, that one of the current 747s will end up here in this museum. And in fact, this building was built with the intention of being able to house a giant 747 presidential aircraft. There are 6 smaller aircraft here as well that were used for presidential transport. These are smaller planes that weren't necessarily used as the primary mode of transport for the president, but they were used for shorter trips and other dignitaries and members of our own government. They have one of 2 helicopters that were used starting in 1957 when Eisenhower became the first president to fly in a helicopter when he lifted off from the White House lawn. They have one of the helicopters here, one of the 2. The Air Force operated these helicopters, but now, and since 1976, the Marine Corps has operated the presidential helicopters, those big green helicopters that we see the president come back and forth to the White House in. That's it up there, suspended from the ceiling. So that was one of the first 2 helicopters used for presidential service. President Eisenhower also used this airplane. He would travel back and forth between the White House and his farm in Pennsylvania on this plane, and sometimes took the controls, as it says here that he also was a pilot. This is a photo of Eisenhower and his pilot in front of the airplane. In 1961, the Air Force acquired 6 of these airplanes. This was a Lockheed plane. It says here that it was the first business jet to be produced in quantity. This particular plane flew Nixon, Ford, Carter, and Reagan. When it carried the president, it did have the call sign of Air Force One, but these were never used as primary presidential aircraft. President Clinton flew on this aircraft as president, and Ford, Carter, and H.W. Bush also flew on this plane, although after the presidencies. So these planes were built not only to fly the president in certain situations, but they also flew high-ranking American officials and the families of the president. So in total, if you include the primary presidential aircraft that are here, as well as the secondary presidential aircraft and helicopter, there's a total of 10 presidential airplanes in this gallery. And it contains an example of every former primary presidential aircraft. The only one that's not here is the 747 currently in use. Now that is a really impressive collection of airplanes. The history of those planes, the people that they carried, the things that happened on board, the places that they went, has so much impact on American history over the last 70, 80 years. I think when you come to a museum like this, 1.1 million square feet, 360 planes, You're not going to get through that in a day, not well anyway. Today I was able to just look at those airplanes, focus on those planes, get in depth into the history of those planes, the reading, and I didn't have that feeling of, okay, I need to get on to the next thing because there's so much ground to cover here. Just wanted to focus on that one group of airplanes. And yeah, super impressive, super impressive. I'm glad I got to see it, and I hope that you enjoyed it, and I will see you down the road.